Welcome, everyone. This is your wonderful host, G, coming to you on a Tuesday night. Hopefully, I'll get this out Wednesday or so. Tonight's topic will be logistics, and I'm going to bring in some little side thoughts, too. Let's start off. I want to put some information ahead, and I want you to automatically go, is this man correct? I want you to go, G, are you an idiot? I want you to be like, did you get something wrong? There are three reasons I want you to do this. One, I think the people who discuss this stuff more often than I do, like Brushbeater, like Dolio, far more deeply embedded in government and international politics than I am. I would say Patriot Man does a great job on American Partisan. He's very well cued in on this as well. We don't hear him as much, but when he comes on Thursday nights, you definitely get to hear his opinions, and he's very well versed, very knowledgeable on this as well. I know right now, I think Mechmedic and a couple of the other guys are at the Special Operations Medical Association. They're having a great time. Apparently, they had a hot wash and way too late, but they're learning a whole bunch of stuff that they're going to bring back to our community. In a fitful, stupid attempt at trying to find something interesting in my world of interest, looked for Special Operations Radio Associations, and that doesn't exist. Probably because there's a lot of encryption and all the other technical stuff going on with that, and the medical side of things generally is driven as much from war as it is on the civilian side, and they both drive each other. So, we're going to talk logistics. We're going to talk about logistics of Ukraine, Russia. We're going to talk a little bit about China. And I want you up front to know that I'm not a supporter of either Russia or Ukraine. I'm going to be proposing most of this information from a support of Ukraine. Realistically, there's a lot of reasons why that conflict went on, but if China were to invade Taiwan, I would much rather support Taiwan, and you guys can have your opinions of it. I am fair to tepid in that conflict on who was the worst person. I have a background knowing about these countries well before any of this came about. And if you ever meet me at the G Camp, I'll probably have something Russian. Not because I love the Russians, it's just stuff I've collected over time. Kind of like some guys who do Rhodesia stuff. That said, take that as my block of salt to this conversation. Also take a block of salt to realize that I am not spending 100% of my time researching all this like the other guys do. They spend a lot of time doing other things, but I know a lot of international politics, and they're on top of it right now. I'm sure by Thursday there'll be a definite discussion about India and the missile strikes that have been shot over there. I have not listened to their podcast yet either, so I'm going to be hitting that up pretty soon. But let's roll back. Why am I talking about any of this stuff and logistics? First, I want to talk about China. Now, I have been pandering myself to listening to Business Basics on YouTube, which talks about China. They're usually 43 minutes long. And I also take a huge block of salt with these guys, too. They talk about the downfall of China. They talk about a whole bunch of other stuff. From what I can tell, they believe that there are quite a bit of protest in China. And while researching some of that, I also saw that Washington State had their protests, which made me think in a different dimensional warfare, the fifth generation, the logistics of all this. I wanted to bring my thoughts to you guys so you can ponder it and also either discredit me or say I'm wrong. But while I was doing the research into China, and I've done research in them multiple times, China's logistics trains have always been haphazard at best, and there have been conversations about missile warheads with water in it, people using rocket fuel to heat hot, what they call them, not hot pockets, they're hot pots in China for the military. Now, let's caveat this too. There are lots of cases where explosives have been used to cook food to prevent a smoky fire by U.S. soldiers. So there's a caveat. I'm like, I don't know if this is true or not. This might be an argument. that they are having logistical issues, but it also might be something that absolutely is just run-of-the-mill infantry nonsense, or for them, their rocket force doing such things. What also kind of got my attention was the firing and disappearing of their second highest general. This is something that Xi Jinping has done before. We're seeing a little more of this, and we're seeing protesters who are just vanishing. That's the China way. But they're having protests, and I'm sure all of you guys listen to Scout's podcasts, and he's been very negative in certain aspects on some of the tariffs going out. I won't say negative. I'll say hesitant about them. And I have too. But what I've also seen is with these protests in China, they've been potentially connected to the tariffs because some of these plants are shutting down already. And if you know anything about China, China had this huge economic collapse that they've been trying to fight off due to crumbling infrastructure buildings. To make a long story short, they built a whole bunch of buildings, started the projects, didn't finish them, and they were being bought as the only resource the average Chinese person had to retaining any of their wealth, unlike our countries where you can buy products and buy cars. You want 20 cars, you can. You want guns, you can buy a whole bunch of guns, put them in safes, and eventually have financial security in that feature. Buy gold, buy silver, whatever you want to do. China's got some restrictions on that. It's a deep dive if you really want to go into it. But property and apartments were a thing that they had looked at as being a way to preserve their income. And a lot of these buildings weren't even completed. They didn't have running water. They didn't have any of this stuff. And there were protests over this. So this has been going on for a while now. Fast forward to now, they're seeing plants shut down and all the other issues they're having. And I question if Trump's actions towards China and this tariff war was not only just to scare people into coming to the table and reorganizing and doing a better deal, but it might be one of the reactions to a unhinged China to put them in their place. Now, why do I say this? Vietnam was a crushing defeat economically for the United States in multiple ways. Not only in the people that died, but the amount of finances we dove into that country to ultimately have a fail. And there are people out there, specifically I would say Fat Electrician, if any of you guys watch him, he did a great podcast. And I bring him up because this all ties together. I bring him up because he talked about a submarine commander, and he was the original progenitor for a lot of my stories on looking at submarines specifically as a guerrilla fighter. And I think that's something that a lot of people forget. So you have a submarine, you have sensors, you have all this other stuff. This submarine commander, Mush Morton, ultimately sacrificed his life during World War II. He also was one of the key people to turn submarines in from a reconnaissance platform to a epic destroyer in Japan, but how we looked at submarines. And this is where I want to focus some of this, because the logistics of a submarine is you pack it full of people, 40, 50, 60 people, depending on the size of the submarine. Talk about German U-boats. You had between 5 and 8 or 9 officers and maybe 40 crew total. So I can't remember the Blau class and all the other stuff on the American side, how many people they had. We had some better ships, we had better systems, but it was also World War II, and a lot of things didn't work out. There was also the R class, which is older. That said, as a guerrilla force, you need to look at logistics like a submarine and not as a stand-up army. And this kicks back to China. China's infrastructure and logistics platforms for their militaries originally were all built under guerrilla warfare. They were fighting Japan, then they were fighting themselves beforehand, and the ultimate victor was socialists. And they carried everything everywhere. Now, I'm not telling you to be a one-man pack with 80 pounds. I've already written an article on that. I think I've made a podcast discussing how much weight you really want to put on yourself. Hint, stay under 45 pounds for combat. But they had a spread out and diversified logistics. China also has shit logistics militarily. Now, they are working on it. They have their version of the C-17. It is, from all accounts, about 2/3 the capacity of our C-17. They have Antonov 12s and a few other platforms for the aircraft. But they don't have the reach to come way over here. They have the reach to interfere with India, Russia, etc. But they also have a problem with a lot of their trucking systems. And that's why when I experience anyone talking about the threat of China, I push them to the side as ill-informed on their logistics and their inability to attack the U.S. That said, they're a great boogeyman. They're also a horrible threat to their neighboring countries, Japan, Taiwan, like I said, the other countries, India. They're always bickering on borders and stuff like that. And I haven't done a deep dive on them for a while. I'm probably give it about a year and a half I haven't. So when we look at this, on the logistics, they've modernized from guerrilla warfare to a stand-up army. They have a rocket force, they have air force, they have navies, and their navy was very shallow water for a long time. They're pushing out for a blue water navy. They've had a lot of setbacks. A lot of their construction has been piss poor at its best, and a lot of their engines wouldn't perform as well. And we've seen that too. There's been a talk about the new M10 tank that we've made, and it's not being exactly what it was intended to be. That's been pushed on by Bradley, and I think it was the Pentagon Wars was the movie. That's not quite an accurate representation of the plans and what went on to it. So we may be seeing a lot of this Business Insider YouTube channel repeating stuff that they hear about China from foreign sources, which is good, but I like to take some salt with it. That said, logistically, they still have a big problem with that. A lot of their transit capabilities across the ocean would be with civilian vessels, specifically. The U.S. military has a procurement strategy where they pick up aviation from civilian side. Evergreen is one of the companies that has worked with them on that. Basically, they say, hey, we're going to requisition all the aircraft to fly logistics. Normally, there's a contract that goes in. They pay for all that stuff. But there's a possibility, if it was all-out war, that they say, you're now relegating all your aircraft and everything else over to us with your pilots. But that's an extreme measure. I believe the Navy has a certain thing along with that with shipping vessels. I don't know the details on it, so I can't tell you. And I'm assuming it only connects with American-flagged vessels, although needs must in time of war. And we saw this during World War II as well. A lot of people got conscripted. A lot of people things changed. A lot of shipping turned into military vessels shipping military supplies, which also caused the unrestricted warfare with Germany. So, a little bit about China, and we're going to just recap it. China's logistics may be a little gray, may not be as good as we think they are, it's not as well as they present themselves. Being a socialist system, they like to talk themselves up, but aren't actually performing where they think they should. They've had major leadership in the army and other forces disappear, not only from websites, but just vanish. And that can cripple a whole military. If you look at the Soviet Union and Stalin and his purging, that was a lot of the problems with their military. All right, kind of got an idea there. China doesn't look so golden on the logistics. Their regional hemisphere of control they've got the capabilities of, but not the best. Let's move over to Russia and Ukraine. And I'm going to talk about current stuff, a little bit about Russia's past on this as well. Ukraine's logistical system was based off of a lot of the Russian systems. And one of the things that Russia did was train logistics. Now, their country, when you actually look on it on a globe instead of a standard square map. Think your standard Mercator projection, which is just your standard rectangle. And it tends to make Russia look a lot bigger than it is. It is still fairly massive of a country, and a lot of that is just dead space. You get out of the western side of Russia, from away from Europe, and quickly things become more inhospitable, and logistics turns very difficult for Russia's military to move. So their primary mode of transportation actually is trains. They do use aircraft. A lot of their aircraft have been sold off to civilian companies that still work with them. We actually saw that stuff in Afghanistan, where Ukrainian and Russian aircraft were being flown, and they were flying MRAPs and other vehicles in with American contractors, making sure that Russian people weren't sneaking all over the MRAPs. That said, I'm pretty sure they got all the intel they wanted. But that train system has its drawbacks. And this goes back to World War II again. Russia and Germany fighting each other. German tracks were not the same as Russian tracks. There's never been an international standard. And when they pushed Ukraine, the Ukrainians were smart enough to cut a lot of their tracks, railroad tracks, and all that supplies down. And this has been a key feature in Ukraine. Ukraine has been fighting a near-peer war and a guerrilla warfare in the same manner. And you can say they're losing, they're winning, whatever. I don't really care about that. There's arguments on both sides, and to be fair, my judgment on this, which also may not be 100% great, and I was not correct at the start of the war, was if Russia was left to its own devices and Ukraine hadn't gotten any outside support, Russia would have crushed them fairly quickly. I think still, when they initially pushed in, they had no surprise per se. We all knew it was coming. They were doing this massive quote-unquote training exercise, which China does the same thing over in Taiwan all the time. Also, side note on that with the China thing, China had their little war games, and they had to cut them short, which is not a good sign for them. And that may have been a logistical issue with the ships. Russia has a worse logistical system with their ships. They literally can't send their damn carrier anywhere without a tugboat. And they're pretty much SOL there. You've already seen one of their ships destroyed by Ukrainian forces at the start of the war. And I'm not saying Ukraine's a spring chicken in this either. Ukraine's got its own issues, and to be fair, if you know anything history-wise, Russia was created, its birthplace was the northern part of Ukraine, and that is something a lot of Americans don't know. That's why you see the cultural fights over there and the similarity between Ukrainian language and Russian language. So when the Ukrainians, stepping back to the Ukrainians, when they cut all these places off, they tried to slowly control traveling points. And you saw when the ground froze or it thawed, the movement of Russian forces changing. But we also saw something else during this whole evolution to drone systems and everything else like that. If you look at the drones attacking things, we see these great videos they post online. Ukraine's got all these cool drone shots of tanks being blown up and everything else. What they don't show as much of, and you can still find them, is the absolute hellacious attacks on transportation of Russian vehicles coming in with supplies. And it's a phenomenal move. Russia, with their trains, they get out and they move in as fast as they can. But what Russia does do almost all the time, this is Chechen War, the first one, and the second one, the Georgian War, they stretch their troops as far as they can go with almost no resources. That means a lot of the infantry are left to find their own food and basically raid homes and steal food or pick berries off the ground. Their water purification systems are almost absolutely non-existent. They do have water purification systems, but none of the troops have them normally. I bet you before the war with Ukraine, we had more of their filtration systems in the U.S. than they had over there. And this also comes to another thing that was a problem with both Russia and Ukraine, and still is with Ukraine, and I'm sure it still is with Russia, but who knows? I don't track them as much as I used to, and they have sealed off a lot of their open source materials to the average citizen, and the propaganda on both sides is standard Soviet drivel. Everyone's winning all the time. Everything's perfect. They're always doing the best that nobody can defeat them. I understand you're at a war. You have to do that. You're trying to promote your troops. You're trying to make people positive, and you want to make people fight and not give up. Because there is that facet of warfare too. Not only is it a logistical war. For instance, World War I, Germany lost a lot of their capabilities after getting the hell smashed out of them. But it wasn't just that. It was back home that there was internal struggles and the Kaiser and all this other stuff going on that broke them more than anything else. At the time, Germany was still in France. Germany had pushed in there. And that's another story. You can go in there, read up on the Weimar Republic and the history of that. I think is actually more telling than reading about the Nazis in World War II, especially when you talk about how they were the National Socialists before, and the Nazi moniker came from the people who disliked that party before they were even a monstrous threat. Anyways, back to the whole Ukraine thing and Russia. Russia has been notorious about selling their products through fences to their own enemies. They also sell anything they can. The logistics and supply officers in the Russian military have pushed more weapons and more tanks and tank motors to other nations than probably all the arms dealers combined. That's why they have the arms dealers that had a whole supply ship, cargo ship, full of tanks, even a couple helicopters, missiles, and everything else. And I want to say they got caught up in the 2018, might be the 10s, earlier than that. And they were captured. And this was technically illegal smuggling of weapons. I think their GPS got hacked and they got pulled in where I believe the French got a hold of them. But they used to go up and down the coast, they still do, to Africa and sell this stuff. Now here's the kicker. Russia decides to invade Ukraine. Russia goes into Ukraine. All of a sudden they take losses because it's a war. And they're mentally prepared for that. They know this can happen. But what they didn't realize is all these logistics guys had sold all their shit off, including engines, tracks, basic backup supplies that you'd have in a military. And we're not talking just gear, but we saw so much gear that was relegated to older Soviet-style stuff. And we could talk about the new AK-12 being a piece of shit. Sure it is. And they have enough AK-74s. But we saw bolt-action sniper rifles being used as that DMR position instead of Dragunovs. Why? Because they were missing. Why? Because other forces in the world preferred those over not having them. And these guys sold them off, but they write them down in the books. Hey, we've got 1,000 rifles. There are always 1,000 rifles. The new logistics guy comes in. He's told everything's there. He signs the paperwork, and then he finds out it isn't. But he's also probably been working this for a little while, and he realizes, well, I'm screwed. I might as well sell something, make a nest egg, and then pass this buck on to somebody else. And that's why you also saw, at the start of the war, so much flip-flopping with Russian officers as well, and generals disappearing off to forced retirement. I think someone went to prison as well. Ukraine has the same issues. Do not let them tell you otherwise. Ukraine is so close to Russia. The war is more like Texas versus California than it is Germany versus Russia, if that makes sense. Now, there's a definite difference. There's cultural differences. The people have a lot of social differences, but there's a lot of Russians in Ukraine, and I don't think that's going to change even after this war is over with, and we'll see how that goes. So, train logistics, you cut the trains off. Now, fast forward, Ukraine's been striking all these supply trucks with as many drones as they can. And Russia's on the back foot of it. If you look at it, they're they're putting more money into rocket strikes, into artillery strikes and stuff like that. And it is hampering Ukraine. Ukraine, the technology that's coming from Russia to hinder wireless transmissions, to track these drones down, to track the point of origin for this stuff, has been moving at a fairly good clip, but they're still lagging behind Ukrainians. Ukrainians are fighting a guerrilla warfare. They're sending drones out with monofilament wire systems that have little fiber optic connections to the drones, and the forests are being covered in this little clear wires all over the place. Now, that means the Russians can track them back, but these drones get flown out over top of the lines, and they go out and attack what they can. Russians have been fighting this logistics thing so bad that they are bringing animals in, they're bringing motorcycles, they're bringing civilian vehicles. And you could say, oh, Ukraine's winning because of this. Sure, but this isn't the first time. This is nothing new with war. And they've started putting nets over every main thoroughfare to protect their logistics. Ukraine has had a hell of a time hitting back into Russia deep enough to actually hit the logistical beds and destroy a lot of the supplies. Partly because Russia, I believe, and this is an assumption, this is not facts, I don't have anything to hold this up, I believe the logistics trains are still shitty and they're still pulling stuff out there as fast as they can. Ukraine has got a similar issue too. The Abrams tanks are over there. I know one of them's been destroyed. I think multiple have at this point. I have not been tracking everything America's been sending over there and what's gotten destroyed, because realistically other people are doing this and doing a far better job. And we're not sending our top Abrams out there. You've got other people handling these things and they could make piss poor mistakes. So let's flow back to the submarines. I know I'm all over the place, but I want to go back to Mush Morton. Mush Morton was sitting there in the submarines. He had a couple bad leaders. He had a leader who didn't want to fight. He had been called Yellow Belly at one time for not wanting to do certain things. And you can watch Fat Electrician's video on it. But while he was XO of the submarine, before he got switched out, he watched all this go down. And he's like, I can defeat the enemy a different way. They went back to port eventually and were told, because the edict, the doctrine was, don't go out and fight recon. And that particular captain at the time had gone through the same training as Mush Morton had, but Morton had thought a different tactic, and he did the guerrilla warfare tactic. His previous captain kind of got removed. Morton and this other guy, and I can't remember his name, but he's a very well-known submarine captain, it's lost on me at the moment, were in charge now, and they took that submarine out there and they destroyed ship after ship after ship. They used every feature on that ship. They used different tactics, so much so that when they went to the Yellow Sea, the Japanese thought there were a whole wolf pack destroying all the ships out there. It wasn't. It was one submarine. So that's interesting. Well, what's that have to do with us, guerrilla warfare, Ukraine, Russia, Taiwan, Japan, or China? When you are the underdog, which if you're listening to this and we're discussing guerrilla warfare, you have to think this way. How can I turn myself into a submarine? How can I supply my men with food? How can I supply the weapons I need? How much ammo can I carry? What do I attack? And Mush Morton attacked several things, but he primarily stuck with the supply chain because that was what the submarine was, a glass cannon. Ukraine doesn't have all the near-peer, they do now, but they didn't have the near-peer weapons technology that they do now. At the start of the war, they fought the logistics battle. They attacked logistics trains, and much of beyond their propaganda was the hitting of the logistics trains that we don't hear about in the U.S. because we're all about that battle, that war, what tank did this and what did that. The reality is that's not the case. Russia is also doing the same thing. If you watch any of the Russian Telegram signal pages that put out the propaganda, you see them hitting troops in vehicles Yes, they're attacking the vehicles, the troops, and they want to kill the troops because they want to stop the war by decimating the enemy. But it's not just that. It's hey, if we move forces faster than somebody else, they could have a half-empty line with defenders, and Ukraine can't effectively maneuver onto that point with extra troops. Likewise, the major forces of Russia on another part of the battle line now have an easier time to push through. They have enough people, manpower, weapons to do that. Luckily for Ukraine, they've been smart enough to defeat that tactic as best they can. I don't know how long that'll last. I hope that a peace resolution comes, but right now we're seeing Pakistan and India kick up. With that said, India has a lot of train logistics as well. I think they have a lot of vehicles, and I will probably spend some time looking into them. I believe the Pakistan military does not have very good logistics. That's a little dated in my knowledge because I haven't really looked at them on a logistics platform scenario since global war on terror ended, and it was more on the Afghan side how they were transporting weapons in, and that hasn't changed since Charlie Wilson's War, which was also why I brought up Vietnam. Charlie Wilson's War, you'll read the book, it's very good. Gus Farakatos, he's got a big background. I know a lot of us don't like the CIA for good reason. Gus was the architect to destroying Russia, not only logistically, but almost as a country. They broke Russia, the Soviet Union. And what he did, part and parcel, national political side, talking to Saudi Arabia and other nations, that would put a $1 to $1 value of weapons and materials into the war against the Soviets in Afghanistan. And Saudi Arabia, and I want to say even Iran, some other nations, put a lot of supplies in there to defeat Russia or bleed them white. And that's what they did. Gus, on the other hand, he tweaked it. He said, hey, you guys are sending X number of rifles, but you're sending a couple hundred rounds of ammo. He's like, each rifle needs a couple thousand rounds of ammo. We also need other weapons. They need machine guns. They can't just carry AKs. And they were getting AKs that were being built in Saudi Arabia, other countries being shipped in. America built a whole bunch that shipped in as well. And that was part of the core of that was the logistics train, but Gus built it so not only did they have a train coming in with animals carrying packs of ammunition, which is still very much a real thing today. We still do that in disaster areas. We saw that in North Carolina with the hurricanes. You see that almost everywhere. Anywhere where there's rural areas and pack animals, you see pack animals moving stuff. By the way, according to the U.S. military, and I will have to pull the book out sometime and read a little bit into it, you do not want to overweigh an animal with anything past a third of their weight. That's also probably a good human standard too, but just keep that in the back of your head. The U.S. military has been packing more shit on soldiers' backs for as long as I can remember, up to the point when GWAT started, they were talking about 120 pounds on guys who were probably 185 at best. Your logistical planning is very important. I did write an article on this. I brought up Gus Farakatos. I also brought up everything from the food supplies crossing the nation from Missouri out to California during Gold Rush and other times in the expansion. You can't let this stuff go away. You can't just say, I'm going to carry X guns, X bullets, and I'm good. I've got X food, and I'm good. There are going to be points where you're going to run out of things. Start looking, and this is why I did the whole area study thing before. We talked about Pea Ridge, Arkansas. What's in Arkansas? Well, I can tell you there's the Remington factory, because if you drive through the state of Arkansas about midway through the state, if you're bypassing Little Rock, you pass right by the Remington factory that got sold. I can't remember which company picked up the Remington, but they're still producing ammo there. There's a Sig Sauer ammo production facility, and that is, I believe, in Little Rock. Might be out in Fort Smith. Can't remember off the top of my head. I think it's in Little Rock, though. Well, there's other things in that state. There's animal packing facilities or for food for animals, which doesn't take much transition over to human food if need be. There's, at least storage wise, there's Walther's plant out there. There's a whole bunch of stuff out there that people don't think about. Not only that, they have really good hydroelectric dam systems out there. It won't run the whole area, but it's there. Utah was the same way. You go out to Utah, St. George has its own ammo plant. And the ammo plant isn't that big, but they produce hundreds and thousands of rounds each week. I want to say the guy said he made something like 600,000 rounds of 9mm once a week. And that was their major production for that day. And that got sold almost weekly. And there was 5.56, 50 cal, you name it. It was a cottage industry that he was selling. Basically cleaned out primers, put the primers in the shells that they'd cleaned, put new bullets on it, packed it full of powder, and they just sold it right from factory. You walked in there, you picked up a couple cases of ammo, and you walked right out. There are places like that. Yes, there's Bubba, the love sponge, who's sitting there reloading ammo, not paying attention, and double loading your round, and going to your local gun show and selling that ammo as brand new or whatever. Or I've got this box of ammo I'm selling, or what. It exists. There's other companies out there. One of them got really big, and there was one in Georgia, and I can't remember the name off the top of my head. Obviously, follow Palmetto State Armory at all. They got into the ammo production, so they're building affordable weapons. They're not the top of the line all the time. Their saber line's actually pretty damn good. But their daggers are just a Gen 3 Glock. Not the best Gen 3 Glock out there, but it's effective. And it works, and you can replace parts with the Glock parts, so you can make the trigger better. They've got ammo. Where are they? They're out in Columbia, South Carolina. What's around you? Massachusetts used to have all the production of weapons and ammunition and everything else. I think Colt was out there at one time. They moved on. Does your region have any of that? Does your region have just a small local guy? Then how's your logistics? Like I said, the submarine thing is very important to me. I think it's a great analogy to a guerrilla unit. You're not going to have a bunch of people. You may have small forces. What is your stand-up fight? Are you in Taiwan? Is China just blowing the shit out of all your modern tech? Are you bunkered in a hole somewhere with caches and supplies? Is America being invaded? I say this because China realistically can't get over here right now. 10 years from now, the knowledge that we've put together, the podcasts we do, the articles we write, will it be that point because we've left China alone that they get over here? Or does Trump's tariffs hurt their logistics so damn bad that the whole industry grinds to a stop and China revolts in their own country? Then you have a whole bunch of military soldiers over there fighting their own people again. China's not been harmonious in their past. I assume that they won't be again. Where are their supplies? Where are their logistics? Where are their factories? Do their factories make that stuff? Or their cached weapons to prevent their brothers in arms from being snatched up by the CCP and disappeared? Much like the people that disappeared when they had the whole COVID thing and that Wuhan lab, and people just started disappearing off the website, vanished for good. Somebody made a great argument, and this is just caveat gee whiz information, that tariffs from Trump originally hit and then COVID was quote unquote accidentally released. Now that we can actually say that and not be poo-pooed by the left, who still half of them don't even realize, yeah, it's probably out of a lab. Could have been an accident, sure. The timely manner of it might not be. But we could have that discussion about the Pentagon being hit, World Trade Centers, and go into a rabbit hole of craziness. I don't want to do that. I don't want to make this a political thing. I want to leave that to the Dolios, to the scouts, to other people that are far smarter than me. So, with all that said, and all that going on, if you want to hear about Soma, his podcast is put out, I believe, yesterday. They did a hot wash there. I have not listened to it yet, but that is the plan for tomorrow morning when I'm driving to work. And I hope this comes out afterwards, and then I have another conversation to have about Soma. I do plan to have a conversation about medical stuff again. It's a fascinating world, and I absolutely know nothing about it other than how to kind of pack a wound, etc. I plan, hopefully, I hate to say this to some of you guys, one of you who've passed me a Bible, I may not be out there for the October class because I might be going to TCCC. I really want to do that class, and I want to hang out with the medical nerds that consistently think I'm smarter than I really am, but we'll see if that happens. Other than that, I hope you guys are having a great time. I hope this podcast at least was interesting and informative. I am going to go back to reading the books eventually. I probably am going to do another article soon, and that article is probably going to be on the Chinese potentially backing the Socialist Rifle Association and all the crazy shit going on in our country because it mimics things that happen in their country. And realistically, a lot of these groups like the SRA are being funded by unknown factors, and they don't really have to report it because they're not a 501c3, they're a C4. And when you start digging into them, they're kind of interesting. Also, their logos look a lot like Chinese military emblems more than some of the old Russian Soviet emblems, and that's interesting to me. I may do that now. I might hold off. The area study was kind of a similar thing. I'd started working on it, and then I stopped, and then I started, and I stopped, but it's a good one to base off of. I'm probably going to do a read on that article if anybody wants to hop on with me and chit chat about doing an area study in the region, or not specifically the region. It might be fun to actually do one with you guys as a podcast, but we'll see how that goes. Hope you guys have a great time, and I'm out of here. Good night.